Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon Season 4 Part 2 is basically split into 3 major perspectives. Not parts, though, perspectives. It's all basically one singular story arc about Belle and Ryu being stuck in floor 37, which is apparently called like the White Palace or the White Castle. I think it's the White Palace, with super dangerous enemies that can kill you without any issues, and they will not stop spawning. Like, one of the first things you see in the season is Ryu saying, "All right, Belle, you need to take a nap. You've got 5 minutes." And he's like, 5 minutes? And she's like, yup, figure it out. Because, like, the enemy spawns do not stop. These things are so powerful. They can just randomly turn invisible. I think, like, one of them can just, like, regenerate. And the entire time, they're still being chased by the Juggernaut from the end of the first core. The other perspective is the rest of the Hestia Familia deciding, okay, we need to save Belle, so we have to push in further into this fucking dungeon, as crazy as that seems. And the final perspective shift is the reinforcements that were sent in to get the remaining Hestia Familia after the warning came to Uranus about the Juggernaut spawning. A major focus of this core is about Ryu's backstory, which we finally get to see what happened with her and Evilis, and how her and basically entire team was taken out by the Juggernaut in an incredibly brutal scene. Now, one thing I want to talk about this core specifically, and a little bit about the last one, but this is like where it really gets turned up, is the Juggernaut itself, right? Because there was some violence and some gore and some blood in the Eyes spin-off, Sword Oratoria, Danmachi Gaiden. It has like 1,000 titles, and I'm not gonna keep going with it. But the Juggernaut is like, it's from a completely fucking different anime, right? Until the very end of this season, the Juggernaut is unstoppable and invincible. It automatically reflects all magical attacks. It can regenerate from any wound. It wasn't until the Ryu flashback where you even see this thing get fucking injured, and the injuries that were done to it even then were completely superficial, and it just regenerated from it. And it's so fast that even though Belle is known for his speed and is considered to be one of the fastest adventurers in all of Auraria, this thing just blitzes the shit out of him, 0 effort. But what's even more is that the Juggernaut almost never appears without a massacre occurring on screen. We're talking about like a level of violence that only occurs in the spin-off or when this fucking thing shows up. We're talking people getting cut in half, decapitated, their heads ripped off, their arms chopped up, sliced up into pieces. We're talking people screaming as they're burning to death from their own reflected spells. Like, we get to see like Ryu's friends like blinded by their own attacks. This thing is fucking brutal. Like, Danmachi is basically like a fantasy adventure series about delving into a dungeon, and then there's some harem elements, and the Juggernaut is from a goddamn horror anime. This is a fucking monster. It is by every means living up to its name of Juggernaut, which is named for Jugannatha, the god of irresistible force. This thing is unstoppable until the very end of the season, which I have to appreciate that, like, the defeater of Juggernaut was Ryu, and you'd expect it to be Belle, but it really does complete her character arc and allow it to be her that resolves her own storyline rather than the main character. So I do have to appreciate a lot of what the season does, and it does manage to do stuff with the blacksmith well, whose name I only remember because I'm looking at a page with the characters' names on them, and his forging of the adamantine sword and learning to rely on the powers of his friends. Basically a power of friendship kind of thing, where he's like, I need to get better at swordsmanship, not just for me, but because we're all gonna fucking die if I don't. And I think there's like a lot of satisfying character arcs in this season, and I think the fucking Juggernaut is an excellent villain. I do have to say that the design of the White Palace is just kind of boring, just a lot of rocks, and I think it's a very slow-paced season with a good amount of on-again, off-again action, but it does kind of fall into a lot of the like other issues that I have with Danmachi as a show as a whole, which is that the dungeon crawling is just typically not particularly interesting. And despite I think all of the good that this season does, I do have to say that the dungeon crawling is still kind of dull, even though the vast majority of it is just Belle and Ryu almost dying constantly and then barely surviving. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye.